let's talk about two deals that happened, or I guess two big wide receiver news that happened yesterday. One was a deal. One was ESPN's Jeremy Fowler reporting that somebody might be in the price range of the Pittsburgh Steelers and make a lot of sense after we thought it was over. It wasn't going to happen. Let's start with the deal here, and we'll tie them both into the same conversation. Juwan Jennings signs a 2-year extension with the 49ers, and San Francisco, man, at some point you could sign as many wide receivers as you want. I don't think you could sign all of them. I don't think you could sign every wide receiver, which brings up the question. I mean, what are they going to do? Are they signing all of them and drafting a guy, and then they're going to sign Brandon Ayuk to $25-30 million? I don't think it makes sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I think it's very interesting that Juwan Jennings inks a 2-year deal before Brandon Ayuk inks a deal. I think the more time passes, the more realistic it becomes that Brandon Ayuk is on his way out of San Francisco. That being said, I don't know if it's Pittsburgh. I mean, you're not going to pay James Daniels $18 million a year. I find it very hard to believe you're going to pay Brandon Ayuk $25-30 million a year. I think that's wild. And then the other one, Courtland Sutton, according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, and we've talked about, hey, you're not going to trade for Courtland Sutton and pay him over $20 million a year. Well, according to Jeremy Fowler, he only wants $15-16 million a year. That's nothing. You want to give a wide receiver a good one. I mean, you were going to pay Deontay Johnson 18. You want to pay Courtland Sutton 15-16. You got $18 million chilling right now. The Steelers have $18 million in salary cap space. They still got to sign some rookies, and there's some deals that are going to go into place. It's going to lower that a little bit, but coming up with $15 million is easy for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You saw the big news, both of them yesterday, two major headlines. What are your thoughts on both of them?
I'm going to start with the Jennings contract because Jennings is a name that we talked about last week simply because obviously they drafted Ricky Pearsall early. They have Debo, they have Brandon Ayuk. So we're like, all right, something's got to give there. Then they signed Jennings and you look at it and you say, all right, well, that gets very, very interesting because it's not just a team that has a lot of wide receivers. It's a team that has one of the best receiving running backs in the National Football League in Christian McCaffrey. It's a team that has one of the best receiving tight ends in football in George Kittle. And it's a team that has Brock Purdy, who is on a rookie deal. So I understand that there is money to be thrown around because you have that cheap quarterback. And when you do, that's when you take advantage and sign all these contracts. But you mentioned Brandon Ayuk. I feel like the allure of Debo Samuel has worn off in San Francisco. Like, yes, whenever he burst onto the scene back around 2020 when they first got to the Super Bowl, Debo was the guy. He was that offense. It was him and George Kittle and the band of merry men at the running back position. But now, with everybody that's around them, you have Brandon Ayuk, you have Ricky Pearsall, you have Juwan Jennings. That's your 1, 2, 3. Not to mention Christian McCaffrey. I feel like Debo Samuel is going to be the guy, especially because he struggled to stay on the field. He struggled to stay healthy throughout his career. I feel like he's the guy that's going to be on his way out of the two. Does he fit Pittsburgh? I don't think so. And I don't think that would be a move that the Steelers would make. The Courtland Sutton one gets interesting because we closed that door. As soon as you said 20 million, I said, all right, well, that door is closed. I've locked it 3 times. At 15 million, he's certainly one of the names that becomes one of the top options for the Steelers if they can get him. And I think it starts to make more sense the more that number goes down, but 15 million gets really enticing for a Steelers team that, as we mentioned last week, it might not have to be a guy the level of a Courtland Sutton, but if that is the guy you can bring in, it certainly helps your chances a lot more.
That's what I'm saying. I agree with the Debo thing. I think Debo might be the guy that's on his way out of San Francisco. Does he fit in Pittsburgh? Maybe. But again, I think that comes to price tag. You're going to pay him $28 million for the next 2 years, I believe. And that's more doable than extending Brandon Ayuk for $30 million over the next 3 years. But I still don't think it's worth it. Courtland Sutton at 15-16, worth it every day of the week. You could talk about, this guy isn't a superstar, blah, blah, blah. You'd pay. There'd be a lot of people who would pay a wide receiver to $15 million a year right now, especially over the next 2 years, because in the next 2 years, the wide receiver market's just going to keep getting bigger. So you got to look at him and say, that's your wide receiver 2 who has starting capabilities, who's a great blocker, who's very physical, who's a jump ball guy, could be a deep threat, who could do really everything, who could play inside and outside. That's the guy that you're looking for in a big physical offense. I mean, why not? For $15-16 million a year, And then you're going to give up what, a 3rd round pick for him? You're not going to give up a lot. And it's the same thing with the 49ers. Is people are going to talk about, well, why wouldn't the Broncos just keep him? Why wouldn't the Broncos just keep him? I agree with that, but there's a reason that they haven't signed him to an easy contract yet. There's a reason that they added Josh Reynolds and Troy Franklin during the offseason. There's a reason the Broncos are just doing everything else except for giving the money to the guy that's there and wants an easy contract to be done. And I don't know what the reason is. I just think that it's there. The reason has to be somewhere in that front office and somebody knows it. And it's hard to say that it's not because they're thinking about getting rid of him. Even if they're not sold on it, they're definitely thinking about it. And on the Pittsburgh Steelers side, look at people, we've hit the point where people are saying are trying to ignore the wide receiver thing because it's just been played out for so long. And I totally understand that. That's what this time of the year is you talk about things as much as you want to talk about things, and people eventually just get turned off and say, look, we've talked about this 60 times. Are we really going to talk about it again? I understand that, but I also know that the Pittsburgh Steelers are most likely going to add a wide receiver at some point. That they fully understand that if they're hunting for a Super Bowl, they're not happy with the group that they have right now, and they'd like to add to it. And I think that as more developments come in, even if we're talking about it and people are saying, it doesn't mean anything, Omar Khan's making phone calls. The Steelers front office is looking. Just because we don't want to talk about it, just because people are tired of talking about it, doesn't mean that the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't looking into it. And I think that's important to recognize is, sometimes things are overplayed. I could tell you right now, Omar Khan could care less about things being overplayed. They're in here to make moves, and Courtland Sutton makes way too much sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I would say Courtland Sutton's a name that I start keeping an eye on and I'd start talking about because I think that's, the Juwan Jennings thing. Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe 49ers might have just dug themselves into too big of a hole here. The Courtland Sutton things makes way too much sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And as we approach day by day, I would think that's a real possibility for a team like Pittsburgh, who's looking to make moves and who has already fleeced the Broncos with Russell Wilson. Why not do it again? Why not do it again?
Yeah, and you mentioned developments. It's not like it's a small development whenever a receiver wants $5 million less per year, going from 20 to 15. It's not a small development. That's 25% like haircut to what you expected to have to pay a guy like that. And as far as the Denver Broncos, they don't have to do it, but they also didn't have to bench Russell Wilson when he had 26 touchdowns and 9 interceptions and just beat the Kansas City Chiefs for the first time in that franchise's last 6 years or whatever it was. I think it was 9 or 10 straight. So they didn't have to do that. They wanted to do that. And Sean Payton wanted to get Bo Nix. He wanted to get Troy Franklin. So maybe there is a different plan there than what everybody can see plainly. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's not as cut and dry as we all would like it to be.
Yeah, it almost never is. Almost never is.